Welcome to episode 15 of the Speed Secrets podcast. Today's guest, Jeff McKague, is a driver coach and certified sports vision trainer. So we're going to talk about, you guessed it, vision, and how to use it to make you a faster driver. You're not going to want to miss this episode.
Welcome to the Speed Secrets podcast. Join Ross Bentley and guests, drivers, instructors and coaches, engineers, officials, and others for conversations about high performance and race driving. Listen for tips and advice, thought-provoking ideas, and inspiration to take your own driving to the next level. Green, green, green!
Hi everyone, welcome to the show. Today's guest is Jeff McKague. Welcome to the show, Jeff. This is going to be fun.
Thanks, Ross. Great to be here.
Yeah, and to give listeners a little background about you, I mean, you've been in and around the sport for a long time, like a few of us. You started as a gopher at Powell Motorsports at Mosport. Wow, that was a long time ago. I was there at some point. Then you worked as an instructor there and at the Bridgestone Racing School. You've been racing off and on through the years, and we'll talk more about that stuff. But you describe yourself as a slow learner. What's behind that comment? Are you really, and is that good or bad?
I definitely do describe myself as that. In my brain, I couldn't actually go out and drive a car fast to start off, and I think I'm still that way too. I had to understand everything, so I had to understand the physics, the dynamics of everything behind how things moved, what the tire was actually doing when it was touching the road, and as it started to slide, what actually was happening. And I had this big fear of when a tire started to slide that it was just going to go, totally out of off the track, and so when I did do some research and figured out what a tire actually does when it gets to the limit and then goes a little bit beyond the limit, it gave me a more comfortable feeling. And with that, in every part of driving, I consider myself a driving geek because I just look into everything. I have to understand everything, and right down to the psyche of the driver in so many different aspects. So when it comes to teaching, I've looked at it so many different ways that when somebody asks me a question, I almost have the answer based on what their initial thinking is of what it might be, and I can lead them down the path that will give them the best understanding of what it is that we're talking about.
And I don't think that you're any different, or you it's not like you're unique here, Jeff. A lot of drivers are like that. They need to understand that what's going on and everything. And, I talk to a lot of drivers that go, you know what, I may not be the most naturally gifted driver in the world, but I've worked away at it and gotten pretty good at it. And some of those are, they're pros making a living doing this, but they worked hard at it and figured it out and studied it. And so I don't think you're totally unique that way, but I actually think the whole thing about being a slow learner, having to think through, is one of the things that makes great coaches, instructors, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. There's nothing that, and I say this tongue in cheek, that ticks me off more is that some young kid racer jumps in the car and he's just super fast. And I look at him and I'm like, he has no idea what he's doing, but he just does it.
Right.
He can't explain it, but he does it. And that ticks me off because I never had that ability. But I think I've grown over the years to appreciate and be able to actually drive a car that way. And so I guess it makes it easier for guys like you and I to actually be able to go out and coach, where the other guys just have to drive, and they, if they don't understand it and some sort of hurdle or curveball is thrown at them, we can explain it to them and maybe help them through that.
And I think, we'll get more into the instructing piece, but I think, it's a good point of, there are a lot of people that jump in a car and they go fast, and and somebody says, well, you should come and coach me because you're fast. Well, they might not have a clue how to explain what they're doing, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that's part of it. The other part of it, I think, is, and I do, I coach a lot of young drivers, and one of the cool things about a young driver sometimes is they're naive. They don't know that they shouldn't drive that fast, so they just go and do it. And I had this conversation not long ago of is there a danger in, I guess, becoming too much of a student of the sport, where you study it and you understand it to the point where you become too analytical with your driving?
Yeah, and I think I was there a while back when I first started training, teaching people, and I did it on a full-time basis. We had a really good arena of coaches that we worked with and we were working 6-7 days a week at the track. And every day at the end of the day, we would talk about our students and how we dealt with the students and how we communicated. And there were times where we actually had to exchange our students because there just wasn't a good communication between instructor and student. And we had that open arena to be able to do that. And at the end of the day, we did change or exchange the information that actually got that person through. So the point that I'm getting to is that I became very technical. I had to be perfectly accurate as a driver myself, and I realized after a number of years that I was just really technical, not a crasher. I could make it through anything, but I just wasn't all that fast. I mean, I was fast, but I wasn't really fast. And there was a point a number of years later where I was actually sitting in the right seat of a car that took me through kind of an aha moment of breaking through and realizing that I don't have to be perfectly accurate. I don't have to hit the apex and nail it. I don't have to be right at the turn-in point, but to be fast every lap, I need to have a better view of what it is that I'm doing. Meaning, and I mean view as far as vision. It kind of changed the vision, and this kind of goes in line with a sports vision trainer that I worked with, about 25 years ago, that came to the track and dissected both myself and one of the other people, one of the other instructors, in fact, the owner of the company. And he and I saw things rather differently going around the track. My eyes were a little bit more global, but we were both very accurate in time. We went around this one track, Fabi, at Shannonville, and it was a Formula 2000, and the two of us would have pretty much equal lap times, but we debated off track as to what we should be looking at. And his view was, look at the turn in until you get there, then look at the apex, then look at the exit, and be perfectly accurate, where mine was a little bit more of a global view. And I always, of course, our egos take over, and we always consider our own views to be the best ones, right?
What, ego in this sport? No, I've never heard of that.
So, when the sports vision doctor asked us, what do you see when you're out there? And we went through the expanse of what we see, and when we see it. And one of the things that he was amazed at, he says, do you see anything else? I said, yeah, I see the inside frame of my helmet, and I'm wearing sunglasses, and I can see the frame of my sunglasses as well. And his jaw just dropped open. That's kind of the way I look. I don't look at a point so specifically that it's tunnel vision. I'm looking at so many other things at the same time. And I didn't realize that I did that so much until I actually explained it to him. But the aha moment was years later, where I kind of put that practice into play and started advancing my eyes further around the corner. And I was in a car with an older gentleman who had some track experience over the years. As I recall, he had done a little bit of racing when he was younger, and he was just a fun guy to be with in the car. Anyway, he wasn't hitting his apexes, he wasn't hitting his turn-ins perfectly. He wasn't that far off, but he seemed to be able to adjust immediately when he made those minor errors. And I realized at that point that he just came out of the box fast. And had he been concentrating on doing the turn in, the apex, and the exit just perfectly, he wouldn't have been fast. And I thought about it for quite some time afterwards, and realized, and then started driving myself the same way, not worrying about those points to perfect accuracy, and my lap times came down pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think there's a few things there that sort of come to mind. I mean, I always tell drivers, drive the car, not the track. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, right? And you do need to drive the track for a period of time. I mean, if somebody shows up at the track for the first time, you're not going to say, just go out and drive the car on the absolute ragged edge at its limits. Go from the turn into the apex to the exit points. I mean, drive the track. But eventually, and the sooner you get to that point where you're just driving the car at or near its limits, or where it's telling you it's near its limits, and all of a sudden that's the difference. And, I'm going to defend you a little bit. I mean, I know when you say you not that fast, well, I've seen you drive and know what you've driven and stuff, and you are quick. I mean, yes, there's a few special people out there that are quicker, but, I'm not sure you're giving yourself as much credit as you do. So, the other thing I think is really interesting you touch on is I think it's a little bit like, if you go to art school, you go through this period of time where you kind of copy the masters, and you copy them and you copy them, and eventually you develop your own style. And I think that's a little bit about what you're talking about as well, isn't it? You kind of go through this period. I think especially as instructors, we go through this period where we're essentially copying the masters, because we're really thinking about all the technique things, and then eventually we just kind of let that help kind of develop our own style, which I think is that big aha moment. It's like, wow, I just let the car go and go with it, and that's when the magic really happens, right?
It is actually. I relate it to being in my own kitchen and chefing. We start off with a menu. Or not a menu, but a recipe, and we work from the recipe, and then we adapt from the recipe and change things up a little bit. Oh, we don't have that today. Well, what can we throw in instead, sort of thing, and you end up with a different concoction. You're just kind of willing to try different things. And I've recognized areas. Radios in the cars have helped me. I've done a little chump car racing in the last little while.
That's so cool that more and more.
Well.
Yeah, it's so cool that more and more of us, racers are going and doing that kind of that low budget endurance racing stuff. It's so much fun.
Yeah. And coincidentally, I end up in the same vintage car as when I started racing. I mean, it's off by 2 years, but it's an '89 IROC Camaro. And, we were on the radio and we were setting a pace. Chump car racing, is, if not everybody knows, is fairly lengthy endurance racing in an older car. And it's the big part of it is just making the car last for the many hours that you're actually racing. And so, I go out, I want to set a pace, but, at the same time, my ego says I want to be quick too. So I over the radio, I said, well, what kind of times am I doing? And they tell me, and I'm like, okay, that's not fast enough. And so, it just flip a switch and I can be 2 seconds faster. And I'm not really doing anything different. I'm just driving a little more aggressive. But I guess over the years, we get that ability. There's a number of things that are set in now that really make it easier for us to do it. One of the things I probably didn't trust before many years ago was the fact that when I got to that limit, if the car did start to slide, or I lose the back end of the car, I didn't know whether I could recover it. And time again, I proved myself wrong. I could do it every time.
I think that's a huge aha moment for many drivers, is when they get to that point where they go, well, almost the worst thing that will happen if I make a mistake is I'll run a little wide, I'll get a little sideways, but I'll catch it and I'll carry on. And, I always think that, the difference between, inexperienced and, well, not even necessarily experienced drivers, but good drivers good drivers, they just made more mistakes, and they've gotten really good at making them and catching them and collecting them and carrying on. So I think that's absolutely dead on. You're a certified sports vision trainer, and I'm on the exact same page with you. The whole sensory input thing, our vision, our kinesthetic, or feel, auditory, it's just so critical. And I believe all of those senses can be developed. And, I recommend a number of different, vision exercises. Talk to me about sports vision training and how it works and how it helps drivers, and what do you do?
Sure. This started a number of years ago. Like I already mentioned, the sports vision optometrist that came to the racetrack to help us out, that tweaked my interest, and I used that for years following that information. So a couple of years ago, and when I started my company in 2010, it was part of my goal to offer this sort of service to the racing community. I wanted to. My vision is I really want to build something that's the go-to place for all racers who really want to go someplace, where it's an all-inclusive program here in Canada, where I am. And so the sports vision training was part of it. And so I went and got certified, and I picked up some equipment. The Dynavision D2 is one of the primary pieces of equipment that we use. We have a number of other things, but the Dynavision really takes us to a different area, and it really opened my eyes to what's new in the industry. Yeah, there's so many puns in this.
I was going to say,
I know.
Yeah.
I can't stop myself.
Right. But I see where you're going here. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things, when I was being trained on this machine and to be certified, I was lucky enough to actually work with the Canadian elite military, and some of these guys were. All these guys, I shouldn't say some of them, but all these guys were absolutely fantastic at working this board. And it wasn't just working the board. There's so many things that they pull from it. And they openly told me that it was some of the best training that they get for the field. And it made me realize that the importance of the vision and what it does for them, and how it can really advance us in other areas. And of course, I wasn't at that point interested in working with the military. I just had that opportunity. And so these guys are working a board where I would jump on the board. My speed would be hitting these lights. And if you don't know, the board is 64 buttons on it. And it's kind of like whack-a-mole, where when a light comes on, you hit it, and the light goes out and it moves to a different location. So, an average person getting on the board would be about 3/4 of a second average time to hit lights as they came on across the board for a full minute. These guys would be doing about 4/10 of a second. And we changed the program from where it will wait for you to hit the light to move to a new one, to only being on for 4/10 of a second. So in actual fact, these guys are hitting the lights in less than 4/10 of a second. And then we add lights in that are green. The other lights are red. They're always red. And then when a green light comes on, to them, it's a civilian, a hostage, something like that. The red ones are enemies. So they're firing at the enemies. The green light comes on. They've suddenly been presented with a civilian. They can't shoot. They get extremely mad when they actually hit that light, and they very rarely do. So there's two levels there, and then there's a screen in the middle that flashes numbers. And for us, anybody, an adult at a regular reading level, can read the number 5 digits from left to right, and you can recite it out loud. And we ask them to recite it. 6 digits, a speed reader can read from left to right, but 7 digits, we get to the point where it doesn't matter whether you're even a speed reader, you can't read it. You actually have to see it, almost create an imprint in your mind, or just be at a point where you're comfortable enough and you just recite it. So here's some of the things that one of the main pulls that I got from this was, as I'm working with these guys, and these guys are full body sweat. They're moving so fast with this board, and occasionally they'll say didn't see it, meaning that the number, when it flashed up on the screen, flashed and their hand was in front of it, or they blinked and they didn't see the number. And our response as the trainer right beside them, we will say call, and there's very little time in the span. They just say didn't see it, we'd say call, and they would, whatever number is on their brain, they would call out 7 digits, and 90% of the time it's the right number.
Wow.
So, I know.
So
consciously
it was going in, but just not consciously, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They thought they didn't see it, and so with that, it solidifies something that I always believed in, that if you're looking further ahead down the road, your brain is taking in information. You're not consciously seeing everything. But if you see a little plume of smoke from a car around a corner, or you might see even a spectator whose head suddenly jerks the other way, which is now facing down the track up ahead of you, you might tweak just at that point. Oh, something's happened up ahead. Whereas if your brain isn't working fast enough, then you don't actually see that. So the advance of in working with a board like this not only enhances your peripheral vision, which it does very quickly. It essentially gets your brain to fire and work the pathways and clear the pathways so that your peripheral vision is more accurate and more acute. But it also gets your brain to work faster in many other methods, so that it's faster in transferring that information that comes through your eyes to the rest of your body. And the rest of your body will react accordingly with practice. So as I always say, the board is great. It'll make you work really fast on the board. But if you don't have, if you are doing something that you've never practiced before, you might be slightly quicker than somebody else. But if you're doing something that you practice on pretty often, so it's routine for your body to react this way when this happens, because you've done it enough times, you're just going to be able to react faster and more accurately with the training and that type of training on that type of board.
So, and you talked about racers. I mean, obviously this applies to anybody that does track stuff. I mean, as you know, there are tens of thousands of people out there who are going to a track somewhere in the U.S. and Canada almost every weekend of the year. And, so this, obviously I can see, race drivers who are professionals going, okay, I'm going to go and get this training because it's going to help me win more races, and hey, it's going to get me paid more or whatever. But this can apply to anybody, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And as I say, the military, it was great. They could see around them. Police force, when they're approaching a car, they see a different movement. And you and I, if we concentrate things on the racetrack, we can take that information. Our brain is going to work quicker, not just on the racetrack. It's going to work quicker in other areas. Right. In fact, some of the kids that we work with. And where I was trained, they did a lot of kids. They'd actually, kids with ADHD, and even adults with ADD found that they were able to focus better. The kids, the parents of the kids said that once they started doing this training, they were actually better at school. They could concentrate better. So think about what it can do for anybody. I mean, it can give you that concentration level anywhere. So it helps you in business, helps you even just driving down the road. You're going to see things, if you ski, any activity that you do, it's going to keep you out of harm's way even that much more, or make you, if you want it for an athletic or a competition side, regardless. If you race on the track, and your lap on the track, you might do some other competitive sports like skiing.
So what I'm hearing is this is trainable. I think a lot of people look at, drivers who are quick and go, well, they were born with something special. And what you're saying is, you're not saying that they weren't, but I guess what I'm hearing, and maybe it's because I believe this, is it really depends on what you do with it. And if you train your vision skills, you're going to be better at them, right? And
yeah, for sure.
And that's going to improve your performance. Yeah.
Yeah, but the one thing I got to be perfectly clear on is that we can't change the physicality of your eyes.
Correct.
Yeah, so if we see, and we actually do this too, when we put somebody on the equipment and get them to start to train, we might see an area of vision, or probably a better way of saying it, we might see an area that you're weak, and that weakness might come from a physical impairment from your eyes, where we might say you need to go to an optometrist and get this looked at, and so you might need corrective lenses. But beyond that, we're training the brain more than we are the eyes itself.
So it's really no different than saying to somebody, hey, if you go out and run or you cycle, it's going to improve your cardiovascular abilities. And sure, some people might be born with, a slightly different body makeup that's going to make them a better long distance runner versus a sprinter versus a cyclist versus whatever, or a weightlifter or whatever. But, I think that's one of the things, when I do my inner speed secrets training programs that I do, a lot of times I'll talk about, and I'll give some vision exercises, and it's almost like we go through life and we go, okay, well, if I do some physical training, my body will stay healthier. But my eyes, my vision, with age, it just goes away. And you're right. I mean, this doesn't perform miracles. It doesn't cure blindness, but it does help keep your vision healthier. And like you said, it's really it's what happens between the eyes and the brain that really is where the real stuff happens, right?
Yeah. So it's vision and brain gym. Right. Is really what it is. You're going to the gym and you're working this out. And the cool thing about it is when you go to the gym, if you've got, let's say you're driving an Indy car, keeping it in the racing, you're going to work on your neck muscles more than if you're driving, a regular sedan for lapping days. You may not work out at all. You work your neck out at all otherwise. So in this particular case, we can focus on brain work. We can focus on your vision, and it just makes so much more sense to be able to do that.
And I think, the whole thing of, I think it's interesting that, even now, like if you go and get a racing license, at some point you go and get your medical and the doctor puts that chart up there and says you have 20/20 vision or, whatever. How much of driving is that? Vision is this big, massive thing, right? It's not just central vision acuity, what you can read on the chart, right? Yeah.
And just a side story, the last time I was at the doctor, he says, we got to look at the chart. And to give you an orientation, I was in a room, the door was open, the chart was, I had to walk out of the room and walk about probably 5 steps to the line to see the chart. I was in the room sitting on a chair, and I started reading the bottom line from where I was. And he said, okay, now you're just showing off. Yeah. I'm lucky enough to have great long distance vision. As I'm getting older, I'm losing my close vision. But there's so much there. And when it comes down to the vision, as I say, if you've made a mistake on the track, anything that you do on the track always relates back to vision for me. I can trace it back. Somebody will say, well, you went around the corner and you got the car sideways at the apex. I can trace it back to why you did that, and the why is because of where you were looking or not looking, that you lifted at that particular point, and of course transferred the weight to the front of the car, and now the car got sideways. And so let's get beyond that. Why you lifted, and especially if a driver, me being in the passenger seat, if a driver does it a couple of times, I'm realizing, and oftentimes even picking out what they're looking at rather than what they should be looking at.
So a question, I hear this a lot of time because drivers are told over and over and over again, look farther ahead. And I get a lot of drivers that go, but at what?
Yeah.
Where do I look? And again, it sort of comes back to people are different, right? And some people want the formula. They want to be able to come up and go, I want to look there, and then I should be looking there, and then I should be looking there. And I guess, what's your experience? I mean, what do you tell somebody that says, well, where do I look?
Well, one of the things I talk about in the classroom before taking people out, and this is typically with novices, but I talk to experienced drivers too, and I try to create the analogy of understanding of when you should advance your eyes to the next point. So here's the little thing that I do. If you're with your young kid and you get a I can't even think of the word of it now, the dot drawing where you have a bunch of dots on a page, if you connect those dots, I think it's called connect the dot drawing.
Yeah.
You connect those dots. Drawing is when you hand it to a kid, what they're going to do is they're going to find number 1, and they're going to put their pencil on number 1, and then they're going to look for number 2 and draw a straight line to number 2, and then they're going to look for number 3. Whereas you're going to be sitting beside them and think, well, I know what this is. This is going to be a picture when it's finished, so I want to have nice smooth lines. So when I put my pencil on number 1, I'm going to look for number 2 and number 3 to sort of create that curved line so that when I go through 2 and get to 3, it looks like a picture as opposed to a bunch of straight lines put together. So the analogy now is those dots are the turn-in point, the apex, and the exit. So if you look at the turn-in point and then only look at the apex, you might get to the apex, but you might be on a very different angle than you should be to get to the exit. So, take that analogy and bring it to the track. It's a little different now because when you're driving the track, you're literally on the piece of paper. Your vision to see around that corner is different than it is when you look at it from the top. But you've got to create the same idea. So as you approach, and I'll just kind of lead you through a corner, and I'll do it visually. There's a number of other things that we talk about as we go through, but as you approach the turn-in point, you're braking. And as you're braking, not yet at I'll back up even more, because many people start to say, well, how much should I brake for this corner? And my answer is, heck, I don't know. Depends on how fast you're coming into it from the last corner. Depends on what's comfortable to you. And so it's got to be within your comfort level. How do you know what's your comfort level as you approach a corner? If you have the ability to actually see the whole corner, the angle of the corner prior to braking, then your brain's going to tell you how much to slow down. So just glance to the corner. You can bring your eyes back to some degree, but don't look through the whole corner the whole time. Glance into the corner, see the angle. It'll tell you how much to start braking. While you're braking, you can look at the turn-in point. As you get, I'm going to say, 50 feet or so from the turn-in point, your eyes should start moving towards the apex. Now, the key point here is that you're not losing the turn-in point. Your concentration of vision should be used peripherally on the turn-in point. That's most important at this particular point. But by having your eyes looking towards the apex at the same time, not concentrating on it, just looking towards it, your brain, as we talked about earlier, is taking in that information, and even on a subconscious level, you're going to know when to turn in. And let's face it, every time we come to that turn-in point, we might be a couple of feet off the edge of the track, we might be right at the edge of the track, and that changes where the turn-in point is. Not by a whole lot, but it changes it in order to get around that corner. And if you're passing somebody, your turn-in point's in a different spot now. So you have to see that. And by looking into the corner, you see that. So as you approach now, you've made your turn in using your peripheral vision. You're approaching the apex. Your eyes should now be looking to the exit or toward the exit if you can't see the exit itself. And the apex becomes this point that's there, and you'll be able to see it in your peripheral. And again, as I said earlier, in my understanding now, you don't have to be perfectly accurate on it, because you're not driving the car to get to the apex. You're driving the car to get to the exit of the corner. Ultimately, you want to make the whole corner, not just half of it.
I think that's a great point. Yeah.
Your eyes just have to keep advancing. And so part of that advancement helps in seeing the angle change of the car as well. So as you turn into the corner, if you're only looking at the apex, and the apex might be, let's say, 30 feet from you, if the axis changes on the car, you get yaw, the back end sliding out of the car. If your distance is only 30 feet because you're only looking at the apex, it's going to take your brain longer to see that angle change than when you're looking further around the corner at the exit. Added to that, if you do get angle change, and once you start feeling it, you're going to correct it to the apex, not the exit of the corner. And sometimes that slide will help you around the corner. So if you're looking now, your eyes are already seeing that exit of the corner, then your hands are going to correct to the exit of the corner. And it could indeed help you through the corner more so than by correcting it and then having to turn in again for the same corner and making it almost a multi-corner, or getting into a tank slapper.
That's awesome. And just hearing you explain that, it's like, because I've always kind of thought about it, like I love the analogy of the connect the dots. And, if you know where dot 3 is while you're drawing from 1 to 2, it's going to help you smooth out that line. And I see drivers do that all the time where, they're driving from dot 1 to dot 2, and then they get the dot 2, and then where do I go from here kind of thing. And I think that analogy just really kind of makes it all clear. The challenge often comes is, well, what about a corner that, is coming over a crest of a hill?
Blind.
You're blind, you can't see it. Well, guess what? That vision is in your mind, right?
Yeah. Well, and this is something that I learned from you, is now you're dealing with imagery. And, if anybody's ever driven Moseport, corner 2, it's one hell of a corner.
It's more than one hell of a corner.
It's fast going in. I've got drivers I've been working with this past year driving radicals, and these are late bloomers. A lot of guys have had a career in making a lot of money, and now they're ready to go racing, and they're driving a radical as their first race car. High downforce car, probably not the best car to start in, but that's what they've chosen. And trying to get them to feel comfortable not lifting going into turn 2 is pretty daunting for them. And so, I've taken what you said, and it's got to be the imagery. Right? If the corner was flat, where would you be looking? What would you see? Mm-hmm. And just take the corner that way. So as they approach the corner, their head should be looking at where they would be looking if the corner was flat. And if they take that into their mind and then have that visual at the same time, when it does appear, and in those cars at those speeds, you're doing over 200 kilometers an hour in Canadian. I can't think of what that would be in the Imperial. 110 to 120.
No, 100 and more than 120, 130. Yeah.
130 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So you get there pretty darn quick. And so, if you're looking and you know what to look for, as you, through your mind's eye, then you're there. And if the car's a little bit sideways once you get there, you've already got the point picked out. I've got these great visuals. I had a photographer friend of mine. He's actually an auto journalist, and he took a bunch of pictures from the bottom of the same corner, turn 2, of a Mini. This is a number of years ago, but a Mini was coming at him and lost it at the top of the hill, and it's a sequence of pictures. And the best part about these pictures, from a teaching standpoint, is that the steering wheel did not move. The wheels are pointed perfectly straight while the car spins around for probably somewhere around 200-300 feet before hitting the wall. Spun around once completely, could have gotten out of the skid at that point. I fully believe he could have got out of the skid the first time, not even doing a full 360, and then hit the wall with considerable amount of damage. And the whole key of it was that he started sliding before he could see where he wanted to go. And because he didn't have his pre-plan or looking at it through his mind's eye, he didn't know what to pick up even when he was spinning, when it presented itself as he was spinning around. So he was locked straight forward and just spinning and finally hit the wall. So that's one of the first things I teach people.
And I bet every one of those photos shows him looking directly straight ahead, right? Not
Absolutely.
Turning his head, trying to figure out where he should be, but yeah. Well, Jeff, this is awesome. I mean, you and I could sit here for another 4 days talking about this stuff because, and we need to come back and talk more about it. But how do people get a hold of you? How do people find out about some of the training that you're doing? Because I know you're performing magic with some people. At least that's how they look at it. So how do they get a hold of you?
The best way is through my website. It's eventmatrix with an X.ca.
Okay.
And there's a button for, or you can just if you want to email me at info@eventmatrix.ca.
Okay, and I'll put that link in the show notes so people can find you, because I can imagine a lot of people going, "Oh man, excuse the pun. Yeah, you really opened my eyes here, and just got me thinking about being able to do that." And by the way, I mean, yes, you're in Eastern Canada most of the time. That allows you to reach a lot of different people, but there are other sports vision trainers around North America, right? And
there are, yeah. And depending on where you are, we can certainly we have access to find them. So if you're in a particular area and don't know where to go, certainly reach out to me and I can make sure that we find something that's close to you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Jeff. Again, yeah, you opened my eyes and got me thinking about where I need to be looking here, and that's really cool.
I don't think I needed to do that for you, Ross.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Hey, guess what? There's always more. We can always learn more, and just what I love about these conversations is you said things and used different analogies. I'm like, oh man, that is fantastic. Like you're kind of saying some of the same stuff, but you're doing it in a better way. So thank you for that. I just learned a ton. So thanks for being on the show, Jeff. And we'll come back and we'll talk some more about vision and instructing and driving at another time.
Ross, it was fun.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Hey, keep having fun. Here we go again with a quick speed secret for you. Every inch of track you're not using is costing you speed. You paid for it, so use it all. I know this is an obvious one, but maybe that's why it's so important. It's so obvious that many drivers don't bother focusing on it to make them faster. Where I see the worst of this is at the turn-in point. Way too often I see drivers place their car a couple of feet from the edge of the track at the turn-in point. And just that, what seems like a little bit, will cost you a lot. It reduces the radius of the corner, which means you have to drive slower through it. I understand if you're not out to win a race or you're not willing to take too big a risk, giving yourself just a little bit of margin for error at the exit of a corner, maybe leaving yourself a foot or so from the very edge of the track or curbing. But it doesn't take any more risk to set your car up right at the edge of the track at the turn-in point. So do that. Use all the track. That was fun talking to Jeff about vision, and I'm sure it gave you some things to think about the next time you're on track, which is what my goal for this podcast is. I was thinking about this. The funny thing about our sport is that there seems to be two different types of drivers. Those who learn from things like this podcast and can't wait to share it with their fellow driver friends, and those who just want to keep what they've learned to themselves. It's their little secret. Which one are you? Obviously, I hope you're willing to share what you've learned and this podcast with others. It's certainly what drives me, the ability to share what I've learned and my passion for our sport with others. Anyway, thanks for listening, and until next week, keep learning and having fun.